First story today. The reason why we have Kit Cabello with us today is because there's been a big bombshell report in The Guardian that says there's lead in the water in Chicago. And I knew there was something wrong with me. And there's been lead in the water in Chicago for a long time. So what does lead in the water do? This is a big bombshell. Here it is. Revealed shocking levels of toxic lead in Chicago's tap water. Shocking. Is it in the rich people's neighborhoods? Some of it. So once in the blood, lead can cross the blood-brain barrier and affect the nervous system. It has been linked to lower IQ levels, behavioral disorders, and worsening performance in reading and math. In adults, low levels of lead, even low levels of lead, are associated with kidney problems and increasing blood pressure, which can lead to a host of cardiac effects. Chicago has an estimated 80% of homes with water connections made of lead. You know why? That's because up until 1986, it was mandated that they had to use lead pipes in new construction. That's true. More than any other city in the nation. Yet efforts to get it out of the ground and out of people's drinking water seem to be stalled in bureaucratic gridlock. The analysis found, they did an analysis. So what they did was they had people do their own tests at home, and then they could send it in. But the city was never doing the analysis on them. They wouldn't do the analysis, right? They wouldn't put it together so people could understand what it meant. Well, somebody came along finally and did it. The analysis found that 9 of the top 10 zip codes with the largest percentages of high test results were neighborhoods with majorities Black and Hispanic residents. That's a shocker. And there were dozens of homes with shockingly high lead levels. One home in the majority Black neighborhood of South Chicago had lead levels of 1,100 parts per billion. That's 73 times the EPA's limit of 15 parts per billion. So that's a little, well, that's 73 times. That it almost sounds like an understatement. 15. So they allow 15 parts per billion of lead, which, by the way, you know how much they allow for bottled water? 5 parts per billion. Why should you allow 10 parts more in my faucet than in a bottled water? So, and this lady's house had 1,100 parts over. Wow. So here they did here's a map of Chicago, eh? That's where I'm from. Right here. I'm from right here. That's Cicero Avenue, and that's right where I'm from. And there's Midway Airport's right here. And look at the concentration of lead. It's dark. It's orange. So I had a lot of lead in my head growing up. And look at the south side. So this is the southwest side. This is the southeast side. This is just direct south. And there's that song that says, my father was a cop on the east side of Chicago. The east side of Chicago is Lake Michigan. This is because... Anyway. So I don't know who wrote that song, but so anyway, so of course where all the super rich people, there's no lead. And then as you get out to where the poor people are, start to get more leaded. And then that's where I grew up. So that's why I'm a lead head. I grew up in the poor parts. In May 2021, where did you grow up, Kit?
I am a natural born South Sider. My family's been living in Chicago since.
Which ward? Which part of this map?
Well, I don't want to dox myself, but it is the South Side. It's pretty close to Comiskey Park.
Okay.
White Sox Park. So there you go. That's where I'm at. That's as far as I want to go. But what I want to say to everyone that's listening to this is that the problem is far more worse than what's being reported in The Guardian, because this has been an ongoing issue, and a beginning is a very delicate time. I want everyone to know that the city for a long time has had this problem with lead in our drinking water. It's been going on, and the only time they decided to reverse it was, again, as you pointed out, was in 1986. But the thing is, when the Flint, Michigan scandal was revealed to the American people, I can remember when a lot of independent media networks were saying Can you imagine if this would happen to a major metropolitan city like New York or Miami or Chicago? Well, it's been ongoing. And with all the recent reports that have been happening all across the country, in Hawaii, in Mississippi, here in Illinois, Michigan, etc., our drinking water is not safe. And in 2016, when it was becoming aware of what's happening in Flint, Michigan, I want to point out that the Rahm Emanuel's administration did everything it could to silence and suppress any talk about lead in our drinking water. They also essentially did everything they could to make sure that if homeowners wanted to change the lead piping, it would be on the homeowners, not in the city. So for 5 years, I apologize. For 5 years, the Emanuel administration insisted that the lead levels in annual tests were safe. But in 2018, Chicago Tribune and a few other media sources revealed that lead levels were, as stated before, above the federal health standards in 30% of homes.
Well, here, let me get to, so let's get them a little bit more background info. In 2021, the current mayor, Lori Lightfoot, she condemned the previous mayors for kicking the can down the road and failing to deal with the urgent need for pipe replacement in Chicago. Well, how many pipes has she replaced? As of this month, only 180 of the city's 500,000 lead pipes have been replaced. 180. You know, when they replace lead pipes, if you do it right, you can replace 120 a day. She's replaced 180 in a year. Okay. Wow. Health agencies say no amount of lead is safe and that even low amounts can cause problems, but the EPA has an action level of 15 parts per billion, meaning that cities are only required to notify the public when at least 10% of a small sample of homes tested are above that amount. By this measure, Chicago is actually in compliance. The Food and Drug Administration sets the standard for lead in bottled water at 5 parts per billion. See, that's what I was saying before. And that level, more than a third of Chicago's tests exceed that level. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends setting levels for school drinking fountains at no more than 1 part per billion, related to the fact that children's brains are particularly susceptible to lead. By this measure, 71% of Chicago tests reviewed by The Guardian would not pass. Mm-hmm. If the same results were extrapolated to all the homes served by nearly 400,000 lead lines in Chicago, it's possible that more than 100,000 homes could have lead levels in their tap water above those allowed for bottled water. Jeez. This is clearly a public health threat of the first order, said Eric Olson of the Natural Resources Defense Council. There's a lot of people drinking lead-contaminated water. Chicago, the spokesperson for Chicago says Chicago takes its drinking water quality very seriously. But also, a couple paragraphs down, it says the city also encourages residents with lead lines to flush their water for 5 minutes every day before consuming it to reduce the chances that they will consume any lead. That's how they're so serious. They're telling people to flush down. That's how serious. They're so serious that they're not fixing it. That's how serious they are. They're so serious they're not fixing their lead problem. They're just telling people to run their water more. I thought we were in a drought. Anyway, the city has designed several programs to help low-income residents. Oh, my God. So how are they going to fix it? So in other cities, when they replace, I think in Philly, I was reading about it. Like you said, they got a plan, and you do the whole block at once. And you use the existing pipes. You don't have to drill new holes, and that way you can do it fast. They did 120 pipes a day. And I can't remember the city. I think it was Philly, whichever city they did. And that they kept that 180 pipes in a year. And you know how that, and you don't charge people. They're charging people in Chicago. They're going to charge people. The city, we're sending $100 billion to Ukraine. We're going to charge people. The poor people in Chicago to get less. The city has designed several programs to help low-income residents pay for the part of the work on their private property. And it has recently expanded eligibility for free lead service line replacement. It should be free lead. This is like charging people for a polio vaccine. And then you see somebody with polio, you're too poor to get the vaccine. You just give people a vaccine. You just give people lead-free pipes. It's your goddamn city.
Well, the thing is, the city has for years did everything it could to screw over homeowners and people who live in Chicago. There's been an insidious policy by this administration, previous administrations, to do gentrification through environmental racism to kick out poor people who've been living in this city for generations. And it's just worse than just lead. I want to point out that Lightfoot made a promise in September 10th of 2020 to do everything she could to, push to get the toxic lead pipes out of the city. But then this is the same Mayor Lightfoot who's then decided to give an extension and want to halt on removing all of the lead pipes. The thing is, it's worse than lead. There's also industrial facilities across the border in Indiana that are dumping regulated toxic waste into Lake Michigan. So it's not only lead that the North Siders, South Siders, West Siders of Chicago that are drinking, but it's cyanide, it's heavy metals. There's been numerous reports of toxic spills from these industrial facilities in Indiana into Lake Michigan. And so much of our drinking water that we take for granted is heavily contaminated, and the filtration systems don't work properly. I mean, they can't filter out all that heavy metal, all that toxic waste from Lake Michigan. And then you have to add in the fact that there's lead too. The people of Chicago and everyone has a city or town by Lake Michigan are being exposed by dangerous materials, and it's going to severely impact future generations. And a side note, I urge your audience to look up the word Chicagua. That's spelled Chicagwa. And this was an article from Block Club Chicago, a local news outlet here in Chicago. And the whole idea of it is the city is offering its own brand of canned tap water. This is an article that came out in 2022, dubbed Chicagua for a limited time. The campaign is meant to showcase the quality of Chicago's drinking water, as well as the city's rich history with the connection to Lake Michigan, according to the mayor's office news release. The water was canned in Chicago by a local brewery. The cans come in 6 designs with all the label art made by local artists, according to the mayor's office. So in other words, hey folks, even you can buy our contaminated water. Isn't capitalism great? Buy lead contaminated toxic wastewater from the city of Chicago. All the while, people are being evicted from their homes and apartments. People are being exposed to dangerous materials, and it's nothing is really fundamentally changing in this city, especially under Lightfoot's administration. She's still carrying on the same policies of Daley and Rahm Emanuel, and the people of this city are being screwed over, and no one is raising the alarms. I mean, I'm glad this article from The Guardian came out, but this was a big open secret that a lot of people who've been paying attention have been talking about for years.
When I was a kid growing up, the propaganda was we have the cleanest water in the country. That was but then I realized every city you go to, they try to say that, and yeah, I'm like, no, Chicago has the best water. Anyway,
well,
go ahead.
Well, and the thing is, it's more than just lead or the toxic waste from Indiana that's being dumped into Lake Michigan. There's also the Hillco demolition disaster that impacted Little Village in 2020. There's the matte asphalt plant that is operating without a permit that thankfully it lost its $500 million contract from the city. It was built in a public green space area with no one from the city of Chicago, Cook County, or state of Illinois informing the residents of the construction of the matte asphalt plant. And then there's also the General Iron facility too, where again it's still in a back and forth with the city, where it was moved from the north side down to the south side. It's all insidious in a way to gentrify and remove people that the city just wants to kick out. We've seen in Pilsen alone 10,000 people being displaced.
That's my old neighborhood.
Yep. And it's because of environmental racism. It's because of gentrification, and the lead in our drinking water is to be expected. I don't expect the city officials, especially under Lightfoot's administration, to really be drinking the same water, because unfortunately, this administration is okay with having a hands-off approach. They say words we want to hear, but they never follow through.
Yeah, this is the word. I mean, everybody had high hopes for Lori Lightfoot when she came in. She's supposed to be progressive, and she's horrible. And So, and again, like as you mentioned, this isn't a new problem in Chicago. You've been reporting on this for how many years?
Since Heartlands Media got started in 2017, we've done interviews with people in Pilsen and South Austin. When we were on a radio show way back in 2018, we did a 16-minute documentary video about the industrial waste that's happening in Indiana. And it's surprising to see that even since 2017, it's gotten worse. And only now people seem to be aware of just how dangerous our drinking water is.
And what's the reaction in Chicago? I mean, has there been a reaction on the news? Local news? Is there something happening in the city council? Is anybody talking about it besides people like me and you?
There's been a handful of media outlets. I want to give a shout out to Black Club Chicago, Chicago Corner, and the few aldermen, and again, just very few, that have bringing up the concerns that there's lead in our drinking water. This was something that was suppressed under Rahm Emanuel's administration.
Of course.
And the thing is, yes, it's talked about, but then the story dies down for something more shinier and fancier, some sort of celebrity gossip. But it won't be a gossip. It won't be something to be ignored when you have behavioral problems happening with children, when you have people suffering from cancer and other ailments because of, again, heavy metals, toxic waste, lead. It's worse than just lead. It's everything. Our air, our soil, our water is being contaminated, and our city is only now concerned. And I don't believe in what Lightfoot is trying to do, because her administration is completely an absolute failure. She has allowed herself to embarrass herself in front of the city of Chicago. She is completely thin-skinned, incapable of taking any form of criticism, and she's a hypocrite through and through. And in 2023, the people of Chicago will have a choice of who will be their next mayor. But unfortunately, in the 2019 election, there was low voter turnout, and it was a choice between Lightfoot and Prepwinkle. And at the time, it looked like Lightfoot was the better of the candidates. We actually covered that election. But now seeing everything and how it played out, I am concerned about the people of Chicago, especially those on the south and west side. I mean, my family's been living here since the 1950s, and it's systematically you see people being evicted from their homes, you see the tent cities rising up, and you see small businesses being shut down, and there's no one in this city concerned about the people. The people are being forgotten, and it's no wonder the trust in a lot of America's institutions are just disappearing.
Well, when's the next election for mayor?
In 2023. So our YouTube channel, Chicago Corner, will be covering that. I want to give a shout out to my colleagues Jerry Vassilatos, Edward Heller, and Kira McCown, who host Chicago Corner. We here at Heartlands Media will also be covering that election too. It's something that we have to talk about, and I know a lot of people are burnt out by electoral politics, but Lightfoot's got to go. We need someone who's going to care about the people, and with the lead in the water still, we need an administration that's going to make sure that it's not the homeowners paying for it, the small business paying for it. It's actually, it should be the city. But then again, Biden decided to give money to the cities, and what do you say? Oh, just give it to the police force, and that's what Lightfoot did.
That's what they did. I know.
I want to bring this up. And unfortunately, in 2018, we covered a community in East Chicago, Indiana, Daniel and I. And this community, predominantly African-American, was built on top of the remnants of a lead smelter factory. And the soil contamination level was about, I believe, 9,000 parts per billion, which is severely above any safe records I have. And there's been reports of people in their 50s getting hysterectomies and suffering from cancer. I mean, my colleague Daniel Lupker, who worked as a contractor removing lead paint, pointed out how all the trees had severe cancer tumors all over them. I mean, that's a community in Indiana that has lived with lead and had a lot of violent problems there because of, again, it was built on top of a lead smelter, the remnants of a lead smelter factory.
Yeah. Yeah, reality is worse than fiction. Virginia Beach, Richmond, Arlington, San Jose, Miami, West Palm Beach. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets and become a premium member while you're there.